right, good morning if you're watching in the morning, or good afternoon or good evening. So we're going to be in Revelation chapter 8, verse 5. That'll be our launching point today. And we'll get into chapter 9. Just a little bit of a word of warning. This is the part of the book of Revelation that gets quite scary. So if you're a person that's greatly affected by these images, I always remind you to go back to the beginning of chapter 1, where we see that this book is about the one who loves us and died for our sins and with his blood washed us clean. If you get scared, go back to the throne room scene in chapter 4, where the Lamb who was slain is at the center of all history, where he now reigns as one standing, and et cetera, et cetera. So don't linger on the negative when the Lord has given us in his word so many other beautiful images, but we need to see them both. Okay, so with that, I invite you to pray with me. So Lord, we ask for your courage and faith, the bravery to see the reality of a world under sin and great spiritual darkness. And we also ask that you give us a greater vision to fix our eyes on you, the author and perfecter of our faith, that we might have an enduring faith, a steadfast faith, a courageous faith, even in the midst of troubling time and tribulation. Lord, this is not too little of a thing to do for us. Lord, you've promised to give us peace that passes all understanding. So we ask as we continue, Lord, in these horrific visions, that you would give us, Lord, you would give us a faith that's realistic in the sense, Lord, that we still have emotions and struggles and fears, but at the same time we have you. I guess we'll just keep it that simple, Lord. Amen. Okay, so the angel, so remember we had this golden throne in heaven. It's got 4 horns. It looks like the brazen altar from the tabernacle complex where they burnt offerings. So this one also has smoke and fire, but they're not offering animals here, obviously. But this angel is standing in front of the altar and getting ready to offer up the prayers of the saints. So, some people have criticized the Catholic Church, Lutheran Church, or churches that have beautiful sanctuaries like candles and altars and statuary and things like that are all wrong and they distract. They can. Almost anything can be abused by us sinful humans, but I like to think of the altar we have in our church as, at moments, I see it as the table of the Last Supper. And there are other times where I stand there and pray. I remember this angel standing before the heavenly altar and offering up the prayers of the saints. So the images of the scripture have a connecting point in that simple furniture inside the sanctuary. And so I do those kind of things. I'm a very visual, right-brained kind of person anyway. So I just wanted to say that our altar on earth is a shadow, but there is a true altar in heaven. That is this golden altar that's before the throne of God. And a lot of worship activity happens around that altar, just as it happens around our earthly altar. Okay? So the angel takes the censer filled with fire from the altar and threw it on the earth. And remember, this censer was filled with the prayers of the saints. So you take the prayers of the saints, add a little heavenly fire, and he pours it out or throws it out on the earth. Okay, so he throws it out onto the earth. You can imagine what that would look like. So here comes the answered prayers and fire from heaven onto the earth. And here's what happened. And so we get all this three-dimensional effect here. So there were peals of thunder, rumblings, flashing of lightning, and earthquake. Now, when the law of God was given at Mount Sinai, we had these same sorts of things. Okay. Also, we have some of these, not the earthquake, but we have some of these images in the throne room of God too. So, nonetheless, it's powerful things here. Let me look. Yeah, like for instance, this year I learned the term earthquake swarms when Puerto Rico kept having these repetitive earthquakes, and I realized as I looked that up that it's happened in other places around the world. It's kind of a constant little thing. But these are signs of God's impending judgment. And by the way, you're going to see all the time here that God is inviting, whenever he does these sorts of things, his judgment is always with the intention that we turn away from our sinfulness. Right? Now, that's not true of us or human beings in general. When we judge people, we throw away the key, right? We want it all and now. We want to just judge that person completely. Okay, somebody mentioned that they're having trouble with audio, so I'm going to pause here and just make sure my settings are working. Okay, so we've got audio. Are people able to hear on Facebook? Yeah, so if people are hearing on Facebook, so if your audio is not working on Facebook, you might want to click down at that little sound graphic that's usually at the bottom right. See if that doesn't work. Okay, so Facebook people are hearing me. We're hearing the word of the Lord, hearing the word of the Lord. Okay, verse 6. Now the seven angels who had the seven trumpets prepared to blow them. Now keep in mind that the seven angels, we need to look for definite articles when it talks about angels. So if it says the seven angels versus now seven angels, that's a distinction. That means that these are a specific group of angels, the seven, okay? And so English has that kind of ability to kind of differentiate between a generic indefinite angel or a definite group of angels. So we have a definite group of angels. Are these the same angels that are also over the church? Remember the seven angels of the churches in chapters 2 and 3? Likely that's who they are.
That's what makes it so
Yeah.
important to study it like this.
Yeah.
If I read it, I wouldn't have seen all that.
Yeah, I only have one student here on site this morning, so, and we have a whole bunch online, so so I got Fred with me this morning. So I have somebody to look at and to talk to. All right, so seven angels with their trumpets. Can I remind you again what the trumpets were? The trumpets were used, yes, musically, but they were most often used to announce a religious feast or a call to repentance, to summon an army, to send an army into war, to retreat, could even be that in the trumpet blasts all throughout the Old Testament. Well, these are going to be warning trumpets. So we're sounding the alarm. So these are definitely alarms. So Sandra says hi, Fred. So Fred returns your greeting. He says, Kyrie. So the first angel blows his trumpet, and there followed hail and fire mixed with blood, and these were thrown upon the earth. So now we've got fire from heaven, the prayers of the saints, and it seems that they're manifest this way. What we're about to see are natural disasters, and then later we're going to see spiritual disasters. And I'll tell you which one's scary. You know, if you think natural disasters are bad, wait to the description of the otherworldly phenomenon that are not natural in the spiritual realm that are upon us.
When it talks about the trumpets, does the people on earth hear those trumpets that something's going to happen, or is it just in the heavens?
Yeah, who hears the trumpets? John hears them in this vision, but I don't know that these are audible things. Yeah, it's a great question.
Are we going to have, before all this happens to us, are we going to hear these trumpets?
I think these trumpets have already begun to blow. Just like the four horsemen, I believe, are already riding. Now, there are many that read the book of Revelation different than what I'm doing. So, and I respect them. Honestly, I do. I believe that from the time that Jesus ascended into heaven, the end of the world began. And these things can either happen all throughout the end of the world, some of them being specific to certain times and places, but you'll hear that Revelation's quite generic about that. I do not believe the book was meant to be read linear, meaning that it's, even though these trumpet blasts happening 1, 2, 3, 4, even though there are numbers here, they're not necessarily, they're sequenced, but they're not time sequenced. You know, they could be blowing simultaneously at some moments in time that remind us that that trumpet is already blown, right? The trumpet's already blown. The train left the station, kind of thing. That's how I read this book. Okay. So hail and fire mixed with blood, and these were thrown upon the earth, and a third of the earth was burned up, and a third of the trees were burned up, and all green grass was temporarily burned up. I just said temporarily, but so these are fires. Do we have that part of human existence? Do we see fires? You know, we heard Jennifer Becker, our DCE, mention that in California at one point, I'm assuming Northern California in the mountains, 392 feet of snow fell. Was it 392 feet or inches? I can't remember. Inches. It was inches. Yeah, and so she had that graphic. So we do know that there's fires in California and other points of the world, and these are disasters that are occurring. Okay, so the people should see these natural disasters and we should say, "Oh Lord, have mercy upon us." It should have the effect that we turn to the Lord, and that we understand that this world is vanishing up in smoke, but we don't. And neither does anybody in the book of Revelation, Fred. So, all right. All right, so that's the first trumpet. Is we've got all the trees and grass burned up. So we had a fiery trumpet blast there. So the second angel blew his trumpet, and something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea, and a third of the sea became blood. So, by the way, you need to understand that these are not necessarily man made disasters, these are God sent disasters. Okay. So this great mountain burning with fire, so it almost sounds volcanic, so to speak, and burning with fire was thrown into the sea, but it perhaps came out of heaven. It sounds like a meteor, like a fiery rock. I remember as a kid, there was a piece of space junk that hit the atmosphere while we were out in a swimming pool, and it was a very clear night, and I just remember the vivid colors of the fire flying through the atmosphere, and it captured our imagination because we were the Star Wars generation, Empire Strike Back, Return of the Jedi, and to see that burning through the sky. But it also made you very vulnerable to understand that, wait a minute, things can hit Earth. Oh, they do all the time. So that's what this thing is, and the this was thrown on the sea, and a third of the sea became blood, and a third of the living creatures in the sea died, and a third of the ships were destroyed. So it destroyed some of the maritime markets and commerce, and it also destroyed much of or a third of the living creatures. Now, the Revelation, you're going to see a third and a third. It's basically saying 2/3 of the people escaped and had an opportunity to change the way they think and act. 1/3, it was judgment day for them. They're done and out. And we know that because of human sinfulness, the physical world suffers because of humanity. Squirrels don't run over themselves with cars. That happens because we have to get places, we're in a hurry, blah, blah, blah. So animals actually suffer under human kind. But once again, so we even see that creation falls under this with God's permission, and it affects the animal kind. And we should hear this trumpet blast and say, "Oh Lord, have mercy upon us." But some do, some don't. Okay. Yeah, Sandra Linder brought up Sodom and Gomorrah falling under hail and fire and brimstone and etc. Yeah. Yeah, and Klaus is mentioning the Arctic Circle burning. I don't know about that, but post an article on there, Klaus, so people can see what you're talking about if you find one. All right, the third angel blew his trumpet, and a great star fell from heaven, blazing like a torch. So this would be probably more like a meteor, and it fell on a third of the rivers and on the springs of water. Uh-oh. So anything that compromises fresh water is bad for everyone. You know, animals, everything's dependent upon water. Um, and the name of this star that fell from heaven is wormwood, which means bitter. I think I wrote down a few notes about wormwood here. Look. Yeah, it's just kind of an idea for bitter. Now, sometimes people use a plant called wormwood in medicine. It was like a bitter herb that would help cure a stomach ache or something like that. But for the most part, it's seen as something that's so awful that you can't drink it or taste. You can't bear it. And in this case, it would be poison. So we're talking about fresh water becoming poisoned. A third of the waters became poisoned or wormwood, and many people died from the water because it had been made bitter. So people still had to drink it. You know, we have all these clean water projects around the world, and you know, it's kind of amazing um, to think that something so simple and basic we haven't guarded and protected as well as we should. Right? There's all these little signs around Ohio. I know some of you listening are in other places, but there's these little signs that say Lake Erie begins here. And they're trying to get people to be aware of what you throw into this river or creek is going to go into Lake Erie. And Lake Erie becomes this kind of collection of all this garbage and chemicals and things that people aren't mindful of. And, you know, and uh, even like fertilizing your lawn goes into the water table, which goes into the stream beds, which goes the into the lakes, the freshwater lakes. You know, thank God in our country we have things like water purification plants and whatnot. But imagine living in a place where you just really have no choice but to drink wormwood water. Yeah. Now, we didn't hear a third of the world died or people died from this, but it was a problem, and many people did die from the bad water. And we should pray, oh Lord, have mercy on us. All right, verse 12. So we're nearing the end already of chapter 8. The fourth angel blew his trumpet, and a third of the sun was struck, and a third of the moon, and a third of the stars, so that a third of their light might be darkened, and a third of the day might be kept from shining, and likewise a third of the night. So this plague, or this trumpet blast, affects the atmosphere. So something is in the atmosphere that's now struck, and it's blocking out the sun, a third of the stars, and a third of their light, so that daytime and nighttime aren't all that distinguishable. And then at night, you're not seeing the moon or the stars at all. A third of their light is gone. So the atmosphere is just clogged up, fogged up, and smogged up with whatever.
I wonder if people back in the day that this was written, think about, you know, when the sun is blocked out by the moon and we have total darkness. I wonder if they assume that's what's happening.
No, yeah. So Fred was saying, were they assuming this like a lunar or solar eclipse? Or they were very aware of the night sky more than you and I are. They paid attention to it. This is likely smoke induced or atmospheric induced. In other words, there's something blocking the sun from shining through. So this could be pollution, volcanoes. You remember that volcano in Iceland that went and it was damaging all the airplanes, right? Because it shot up so high into the atmosphere. And we know the Sahara Desert is blowing into the jet stream and then going down on the Caribbean, and it's killing coral reefs. So, and then I just heard recently that they believe that viruses can now travel. They can, certain viruses and bacteria can survive in smoke. So, like when forests burn or whatever, it can send viruses and bacteria into the atmosphere and they can move around the globe that way. So, they're, now in this age of pandemic awareness, they were saying that it's possible they used to look for hot zones, like, oh, here's where the spread is. But now we're starting to realize, well, it can move in bigger areas very quickly, depending on where it settles. And, we had all the talk about water droplets and all that with mask wearing and whatnot. It's the same sort of concept. But now they're realizing, wait a minute, the more we study this, the more we realize how vulnerable we are to the movement of these harmful viruses and bacteria to humankind and animal kind. So, and it should lead us to say, Lord, have mercy on us. And he does, because only a third, right? There comes the day where he's going to turn the lights off. Yeah, by the way, Sandra mentioned the aurora borealis is the burning of very harmful particles from the sun, from solar flares. By the way, we just saw it on Lake Erie. It wasn't very bright. It was just a tiny little glow on the horizon there. All right, verse 13.
And wondering about that volcano in Hawaii, the vapors from that, but
Yeah.
I guess it settled down.
Yeah, vapors in Hawaii. We're pretty sure that Yellowstone is going to go at some point, and Mount St. Helens, and all these different things. I remember pictures. I don't remember when Mount St. Helens was exactly, but I remember daytime became night. I mean, the smoke from that volcano was so immense and powerful. All your car lights would turn on and people couldn't breathe, and it's quite dangerous. These physical judgments upon the earth, these natural plagues, so to speak, are what's described here in chapter 8. Then I looked and I heard an eagle crying with a loud voice as it flew directly overhead, woe, woe, woe to those who dwell on the earth at the blast of the other trumpets that the three angels are about to blow. So you almost forget at this point, well, that's enough. I mean, we should all be convinced to return to the Lord our God and repent of our wrongdoing before him. But that's not going to happen. We're not even done yet. We had water, and we had the oceans, and we had the plant life, and we had the atmosphere. You would think we'd get the message, but there's still more. And this eagle flies overhead right at the zenith, and he cries out, woe, woe, woe. He flies in mid-heaven. It's kind of interesting that the eagle's mentioned here and is the king of all birds, but it's not described as an angel. It was an eagle that was speaking, right? We did see one of the living creatures had the face of an eagle, but it doesn't describe this as an angel. So what this talking eagle is saying with its great voice is, you thought that was bad, wait to the next three. So I don't know why I'm laughing at that. I mean, it's, there's three more to go, people, and it's about to blow. So, and I wrote a little poem in my notes. Whoa, three to go. Thank you. Thank you very much. I was going to write a hymn based on that, but I lost my energy. All right, chapter 9. So once again, I'm going to give you a little opening here. What you're about to see is otherworldly, not natural, and spiritual. The other things that we saw in these trumpet blasts were physical in nature. They're going to be perceptible they're going to be in headlines, they're going to be things like that. But what's about to happen is invisible. Yeah, eagles are birds of prey, but this one is a bird of preaching. So he is announcing, giving us a little break from the trumpet blast, a speaking bird. And by the way, oh, Klaus, it's good that you mentioned that. Eagles, by the way, are birds of carrion, which means that they will eat a dead thing if they can versus hunting. So they're very much like a vulture. And where you see vultures, you see judgment coming. So vultures are attracted and can smell the decaying flesh. And that's kind of gross. But yeah, I did read that, since you mentioned that, Klaus, that these might be birds circling a carcass. But once again, the bird has a message instead of chirp, 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 and beautiful little song. This bird uncharacteristically has an alarm call. All birds have that, by the way. They have songs they sing to each other, and then they have general noise, and they can be quite creative with it. They can sing their own songs as unique birds. They can, mix things up a little bit, but then they have their alarm and they warn everybody. I was walking at the park near our city pool, and the blue jays were just making a ruckus. I'm like, oh, I'm trying to walk here. Blue jays, don't you know? I need some time, quiet time. I'm just kidding. And then I realized when I got around the trail that there was a hawk in the woods, and they were just trying to spook the hawk off and let everything in the woods know there's a predator. Okay, but this bird is not the predator. It's telling you the trumpets are going to blow, and there will be unleashed on earth some pretty horrendous and horrific predators. So that's what you're going to look at here. So the descriptions here, they're going to use earthly descriptions. Doesn't necessarily mean that literally they look like this, but the elements of the things we see will tell us about the spiritual characteristics of these demonic forces. Okay. It's kind of funny, though, the world, doing a good job talking about, human destruction of airways and waterways and things like that. But they don't sell you on this part. The world is in complete denial about the real threat. And the real threat isn't saving the earth for generations to come. The real threat is the spiritual darkness that is going to be unleashed or is being unleashed upon us now. Okay? So let's do that. So the fifth trumpet blows. So now we'll only have 2 woes to go. But the fifth angel blew his trumpet, and I saw a star fallen from heaven to earth. Now this is interesting. This isn't that mountain of fire or that fireball, that star that came out previously. This is a star fallen from heaven, and then it gets personified. This gives me chills, because a natural disaster doesn't get a definite article or a pronoun. It's just an it. It's a fire. But this is a he. This being has personality. This falling star is a something somebody. And we know in Jesus' ministry, when he sent out the 70 and they came back, he said, I saw Satan fall like lightning from the sky. In the book of Isaiah chapter 14, it describes the fall of the king of Babylon as a falling star. Okay, so this is a he. And it was given the key to the shaft of the bottomless pit. Who gave the key? What are your thoughts on that? Who's handing out the keys? Yeah, I mean, Fred said probably God, and I think you're right. None of the whole idea of Revelation is we see these what we call passive verbs, meaning that it was given to them. So it's not like the keys were hanging on the wall and Satan knows where they're at, because that's who this is. It was given to him. The Lord is allowing it to happen. And Satan says, well, I know where that key goes. And he unlocks the shaft, the bottomless barbecue pit, the shaft. Okay?
It's always scary to Job, Satan and God left them.
Yeah.
They agreed to do this. That's what this seems like.
It does seem. Fred brought up the whole story of Job, and it's most definitely like that. The God giving Satan certain permissions, and it's alarming to us. And what should be our response to that? Well, Lord, have mercy on us, and make sure that we remain faithful in the midst of that. So Satan gets a key, he's going to use it. He opened the shaft of the bottomless pit, and from the shaft rose smoke like the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened with the smoke from the shaft. Yeah, and Sandra brought out, like I said at the very beginning of this chapter, the images that we're using here are just earthly images. They're not literal in the sense that Satan actually has a key and he was given a key. It's permission. He has a leash in which he can run around, but the Lord still holds the leash. So here the bottomless pit opens and more smoke's coming up. But this is a spiritual smoke and a spiritual darkness, okay, that's going to be affected here. And the sun and the air were darkened with the smoke from the shaft. Then from the smoke came locusts on the earth, and they were given power like the power of scorpions of the earth. By the way, locusts don't attack human beings. They eat what we eat, and that's the problem, right? They destroy our food, but they don't destroy us. Not so these locusts. And the scary thing about locusts is I don't even know if modern human beings can still repel a locust swarm. I mean, even with the abilities or things we have, when these bug disasters come upon us, I mean, it's so overwhelming, the numbers of them. What do you do? And I think that's the image that John is seeing here, is that these swarms of demonic hordes are unstoppable. It's coming. And they are given power, or they're given authority like the power of scorpions on the earth. So what does a scorpion do? He stings. So these are unique little insects, and we're supposed to see that they're not just merely locusts. They're locusts with stingers. So they're a swarming, stinging horde from a pit that Satan opened. All right, you get the image? Not a nice one. It's an unnerving one. Well, I mean, a lot of people read the book of Revelation like they read any part of the Bible as an old, outdated book of people who didn't know what they were doing. So they were told, okay, and again, who told them? This is that permission thing. And they were told not to harm the grass of the earth or any green plant or any tree, but only those people who do not have the seal of God on their foreheads. So this is initially, these spiritual forces are targeting non-believing humanity. And we'll see the effect they have. I'll warn you that later on, we're going to see that Satan takes it upon himself to go after the church. So it's kind of interesting. Send the hordes after the horde. I'll take care of the church. Leave her for me. And that seems to be, I that's my opinion on what it makes me feel as I experience this book and as I read this book is that these are the people that aren't sealed or don't belong to God. What do they belong to? The authority of these creatures is what they belong to. And will it have the effect that when they see this spiritual darkness, this stinging darkness, this power that these creatures have, will they turn to the Lord? Will they receive the seal of God on their foreheads?
This is sort of like there was a restriction on how much they could do.
Correct.
And so it goes back, I really like Job, but it really goes back to the same thing that
It's a, yeah, just as Satan was limited in the book of Job, so he's limited here. And I have a quote from the book of Job in a little while too, I want to share with you too. So they were allowed to torment them for 5 months, but not to kill them. All right, and let's look here. I think I wrote down the torment. So the word that's used for torment in the Bible here is mental torment. It's in the mind. It would be like mixing together anger and sorrow. Anger and sorrow. And when those two things meet, it's not good. It can be despair, it can be suicidal, it could be in hopelessness. People do many hurtful and harmful things to each other. But it's kind of interesting that they use that word. It's not harming them physically, but harming them mentally in their minds. They're going to be tormented in their thoughts. You know how modern culture has kind of thrown off God, outgrown him, uh, walked away from the fairy tale books. But they don't have peace, do they? Having cast God aside, they've not gained any peace. If anything, they're all the more tormented. What do you have? A big bang and a sun that's going out? I mean, what do you have? Where is their hope and meaning in life? Just maybe a temporary good that you have, but with no one to be grateful for. Just a hairless ape. That's it. A hairless ape in a time and a place. At best, they try to cover their bases by saying, well, if I'm a good person in this life, if there is an afterlife, I'm a shoo-in. Not how it works. There is somebody at the center of the universe, and he's marked his own. Yeah. So look at the time here for 5 months. Now, in the commentary, it mentions that the life cycle of a locust is around 5 months. I looked that up on the internet, and there's obviously more than one kind of locust. It's usually between 3 and 6 months. So think about these demonic cycles are allowed to occur, but they're limited. Thank you, Lord, in your kindness that you don't let them have everything they would want. We had the katydids, that come, the 7-year cycle of them. And a couple years ago, I think it was, that was quite fantastic. I was riding my bike down the road and I thought it was an alien invasion or something. I didn't recognize the sound, though I had heard it in my childhood. I must have. But it was, wow, I went hiking just to listen to the sound after that, just to kind of drink it in. But this in a sense is what we're seeing here is that they are limited to their life cycle. Not that demons die, but once again, that God is allowing these things to have confined periods of time, and then it's over. It doesn't mean that these things don't happen more than one time. Now, this is interesting. In those days, people will seek death and will not find it. They will long to die, but death will flee from them. They'll want it, but they'll wish for it, but it won't come. So here is where I wanted to read from Job chapter 3. And this is Job when he's under the spiritual attack of Satan, which manifests itself in the death of his children, physical illness, loss of wealth and economy, and all the things that happened to Job, right? So here's what he says. He laments his own birth in chapter 3. He says, "Why is light given to him who is in misery, and life to the bitter in soul, who long for death, but it comes not, and dig for it more than for hidden treasures?" You would dig your grave as if it were a great jewel to be uncovered in the dirt. "Who rejoice exceedingly are glad when they find the grave, finally. Why is light given to a man whose way is hidden, whom God has hedged in? For my sighing comes instead of my bread, and my groanings are poured out like water. For the thing that I fear comes upon me, and what I dread befalls me. I am not at ease, nor am I quiet. I have no rest, but trouble comes." Wow. And those were the words of a man of faith under spiritual distress. Imagine a person that doesn't have faith being under spiritual distress. You can see why they would long for death, and death escapes them. They're under the delusion that dying fixes the problem, not aware that there is a second death, worse than the first. Okay. So, Klaus made a comment I think is interesting. Hell will probably be like that, seeking death but not finding it ever.
There was a cartoon the other day showed a man standing with the devil, fire going up. There's two doors. Take your pick, one or the other, but both of them lead to nothing.
Yeah.
It was, and there is nothing.
Yep. Fred saw a cartoon where Satan was standing with a human before two doors, and he said, "Pick a door," but both led to nothingness.
Right.
Yeah.
But
I, yeah.
you don't believe, it just seems like you would seek death because there's nothing else to worry about. So why not commit suicide? It
Yeah.
just seems like we've really seen really an increase.
Yeah, so what if even in suicide, what if in physical death you realize that death escaped you because you don't die? It's not the end of your existence. Yeah. Good points. All right, now we go back to the appearance of these demonic hordes. And so we're going to see that we're not going to be able to stop this. You're not going to be able to wear a mask and make a pandemic go away. Not this spiritual darkness. It's not going to be easy any more than it's been easy to stop a pandemic from spreading. In appearance, the locusts were like horses prepared for battle. They're ready. They're armored. On their heads were what looked like crowns of gold. Now, it's interesting here that John sees it looked like their crowns were gold, but they weren't. This is fake gold. In other words, there is a little bit of a swagger and an arrogance in these spiritual forces that when they're allowed to do something, they act like they're the kings. Even Satan thinks he's the ruler, and all he rules is the hordes of hell. Jesus has the keys to death and Hades, and he's going to lock the hole again, right? But they have crowns that look like gold, that have an appearance of gold, but they're not. Now, this is interesting. Their faces were like human faces, and their hair like women's hair, and their teeth like lions' teeth. So I'm going to make a comment about that. They bring up human characteristics. So they have faces like men and hair like women. So the commentary mentioned that they have both human cunning and human beauty. So these are personalities. So I find it interesting that in the Bible, last Sunday we had Gabriel. So these invisible creatures that we call angels, they even have personal names. We don't know the names of many of them, but we know some of them. Michael, in the Old Testament, Gabriel in his appearance in the New Testament, and then Michael later in Revelation chapter 12 is mentioned again. So we do know that they have personality. So also, I think these hordes from hell are personal beings. They have personality. They even talked to Jesus. And then he cast them into the pigs, and the pigs went off the cliff. And pigs can't swim, apparently. All right, so they have human cunning and human beauty. And by the way, when St. Paul actually describes Satan as an angel of light, these spiritual deceivers, they're very tricky. You know, you ever watch these TV shows like Ghost Hunters and things like that, and you know they're trying seances and whatnot. A demon's never going to tell you the truth. That's not a good tactic. If you want to defeat an enemy, you trick the enemy. You trick him into thinking you're a greater force than he, and he'll flee in battle, or lure him in by thinking he has a sure win and destroy him. That's how they work. Do not think that these are not cunning and beautiful beings that are not adept and apt at tricking human beings. So, and you have those in our stories, in our culture of Satan always like saying, just sign at the dotted line, and you know, and you lose your soul, and he gives you what you want, but it's not. It always ends up with strings attached to hell. Okay, and they have teeth like lions. This is a very common image in the Old Testament of a conquering nation having teeth like lions. In other words, when a lion grabs onto its prey, you're not getting out. Those teeth are like spears. I mean, that's what they do. They bite and you're not getting out. Here we see the armor of these terrible creatures. They had breastplates like breastplates of iron, and the noise of their wings was like the noise of many chariots with horses rushing into battle. They have mobility, so they have flying capabilities. They're well armored. Again, I think the idea here is there's no way that human beings are going to repel them back. We don't have defenses, but we don't have a way to defend ourselves. They do. Until their time is up, they are going to run the battlefield. I can't imagine what it was like to hear thousands upon thousands of horses and chariot wheels rolling on uneven ground into a battlefield. So I've never been to war. I would assume no matter what, human war is a horrible sound. Yeah.
There were a lot of people that were in Korea when the Chinese came in. They used trumpets.
The Chinese blew trumpets when they in Korea.
So when the battle was going to happen, they blew trumpets and they had armor and everything. Just sort of reminded me of this.
Yeah.
Because it scares the daylights out of you.
Yeah, I mean, one of the tactics in military is, I think, to make as much noise as possible, you know, to kind of scare off your enemy. Demotis was watching a TV show where this Church of Scientology, when somebody tries to leave that church or is critical of that church, they have groups of people they send out to do these noisy attacks. So they just annoy you to death until you go away by constantly maybe dragging you off to court or hurting your business or whatnot. And that was in that TV show. But so these creatures are quite noisy themselves. They have tails and sting. They have tails and stings like scorpions, and their power is to hurt people for 5 months. The power to hurt people for 5 months is in their tails. So they have stingers, and you know, if you've ever been stung, it hurts. It doesn't hurt forever though, but it hurts. They have a king over them. They have as king over them the angel of the bottomless pit. So they do have a king. All right, so we're going to meet him for the first time in the book of Revelation. So we haven't we haven't seen him yet in Revelation before. So now we first meet the personality and get a little bit more of a descriptor of who he is. So these demonic hordes have as their king over them the angel of the bottomless pit, and his name is Abaddon, and in Greek he is called Apollyon. So let me look at those words again. Abaddon, we just had in our Sunday morning Bible study, it was in the book of Proverbs, and it was saying that God can even see Abaddon. And this would be the place of great ruin and destruction, perhaps even on a spiritual level, maybe a description of a Sheol or a hell-like place. That God sees those places, they're not hidden from him. And then this word Apollyon means destroyer. So this creature, this king, that this is what the demonic hordes refer to him as. Destruction and ruin, destroyer. Okay. Well, 2 more to go of those last trumpet blasts that we have there. So. All right, the first woe had passed, and behold, 2 woes are still to come. Verse 13. All right, this is good because this is where we started. But the 6th angel blew his trumpet, and I heard a voice from the 4 horns of the golden altar before God. So there's a voice coming out from the 4 horns of the altar. If you look at the picture of the tabernacle altar, which is called the brazen altar, where they put the animals that they sacrificed and they would burn them, it's like a giant grill. I mean, it actually had grills, and they had this burning fire under it. And the job of the priest was to keep it burning and to keep animals. They burned the grains on there, oils, the fat of the animal, carcass, all that. And it was, plumes of smoke going up into heaven. Like I said, in heaven, apparently there is an altar there, not with dead animals on it, but a golden altar that's before God. And here we hear a voice come from it. Is it the angel who stands in front of it, collecting the prayers of the saints, adding fire and casting it on earth? Or who's underneath the altar? Do you remember? The souls of the martyrs, the beheaded saints, the slaughtered saints were under the altar. And then they kept crying out to God, today, are you going to vindicate us today or take vengeance? And the Lord gave them the white robes and said, shh, rest a little while longer. Shh, be still. Okay. So here we're back at that altar again. And I think it's good to jump back and forth between that horrible spiritual darkness and to realize again, though it doesn't solve all of our conundrums of thought, that God is still in control of all this that's happening. It's beyond our understanding, but yet he is giving permission to all of that. So whatever this voice is from the altar, whether it's the slaughtered saints who are now in God's presence, or whether it's the angel who officiates at that altar, or whether it's all of them in one voice, here's what they say. Release the 4 angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates. Now we met 4 angels in chapter 7, verse 1. I don't know if you remember them. And their job was to hold back the wind. And the wind was symbolic of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. So we met these 4 angels that are holding back these tramping horses that are ready to do the Lord's bidding, right? And then eventually they release them. Well, so it's a similar kind of experience here, that these could be the same angels. So 4, remember the cardinal directions, north, south, east, west. So whatever this release is, it's going to have a global impact. But it's these angels who are bound at the river Euphrates. So their source point is the river Euphrates. This would be Babylon, Assyria. Not all of Israel's enemies were to the north, but the ones that took Israel into captivity were, right? They were in captivity in the south to Egypt, and then the Lord liberated them, and they occupy the promised land. And they had some problems with some other southern neighbors. They had problems with the Philistines, but they were conquered by the Assyrians and the Babylonians. And flowing through the great empire of Babylon and Assyria was this river and the Tigris. So I mean, if you go on a map now, you would see that these are places like modern day Iraq. Okay. So the four angels who had been prepared, and this is interesting, for the hour, the day, the month, and the year. The way the Greek language says that is they were prepared for the hour, day, month, year. There's no definite articles except for the word hour. And so, of course, people then have to debate as to what that means. Is it a specific the hour and then, day, month, year? I don't know. It's beyond me. I don't know these things, but people debate them, and it's fun. And if there was somebody smarter than me, I would debate. We'd ask them, but I don't know. But whatever, this is the only time a phrase like this appears anywhere in the Bible. And it's kind of amazing because it encompasses all the ways we measure time. Isn't that interesting? Hour, day, month, year. Well, it doesn't, now we have seconds and minutes and things like that, but the big pieces and chunks of time. And they were released to do what? To kill a third of mankind. Now, up until this point, the natural disasters did have some consequences and led to the death of human beings, such as the poisoned waters and whatnot. But now these angels are going to harvest humanity by a third. So take whatever the earth's population is and take out a third of it. We're talking giant number, right? You could imagine that if you were a Christian pastor in World War II in Europe and you read that, you wouldn't think that that's someday. It's now, right? And what's kind of interesting is now we have a death ticker with this COVID-19, right? People die all the time, but when America gets a global pandemic, we have a ticker. When the rest of the world dies under plagues and all that, we didn't have a ticker. Wasn't really on the majority of our radars, right? But when it got us, it's front page. And they're tracking it. And everybody blames humans as if we can solve every problem. It's kind of amazing. So part of the hubris of humanity is to think that humanity can solve its own problems. It's humanism or the great enlightenment. And humanity is not enlightened, it's in the dark, in the biblical description of it. The only thing we do in a pandemic is courageously call out to God for mercy. And if he see fit to take a third of mankind, I do not judge him for it. For his judgments are right and true, just as the angels in heaven sing. Okay? So that takes us to verse 15. Thank you for joining me. We will not have class next week on Tuesday. I'm going to be doing a funeral, but we will be back again the week after that. So just keep a lookout. You're invited to come to church for Christmas Eve. We have lots of spots open at the 3 o'clock service. 5 o'clock is it's going to be pretty crowded and we don't want to overcrowd. And then there's some spots at 7 o'clock. And then if you're going to church somewhere else, then God bless you and those that sing and preach. And then if you're going to stay home too, make sure you sing really loud and invite your pets to sing too. We have some members in our church that sent me a video that whenever our live stream is on, their dog howls. The minute the band stops, the dog stops. The minute the band starts up again, the dog starts howling again. And they say that the dog enjoys it. So, and we saw that in all creation praises God. All right, so Merry Christmas, and we'll talk to you soon.